action. The brain, nerves, and spinal cord make up the nervous system. The sense organs detect changes in surroundings and pass this information to the central nervous system, which after processing the information acts through the muscles. Reflex actions, voluntary actions and involuntary actions are the various types of responses as the outcome of the instructions given by the central nervous system. A reflex action is a sudden reaction to a stimulus and often takes place to defend you. Reflex actions are simple forms of behavior designed to keep you safe. Sudden withdrawal of the hand on touching a hot object is an example of reflex action. A voluntary action is an action that you choose to do. This could be playing, reading, and sleeping, etc. Involuntary actions are the ones which are beyond your control. It could be breathing, beating of your heart, blinking of your eye, etc. Sometimes involuntary actions may take place in response to a stimulus also, like blinking of eye on getting in contact with any foreign substance. In such case, this involuntary action will be known as a reflex action. All reflex actions are involuntary in nature, but all involuntary actions are not reflexes. As the beating of heart is an involuntary action but is not a reflex action. The word reflex is used with reference to an action performed by our body to change in the environment. A reflex action is an automatic response to a stimulus. Extremely hot, cold, and pointed objects or scary or poisonous animals are such stimuli which may trigger your body for a reflex action. Reflex actions protect the body by reacting quickly to danger. When we touch a pointed object, we withdraw our hand immediately without thinking of the action. Or when a doctor taps knee of a patient to test the reflexes, the reaction is a reflex action. Drawing back of hand with a sudden jerk when pricked with a needle is also a type of reflex action. Sudden closing of eyes when flashed with high-intensity light is a very good example of reflex action. As when light is flashed onto you, you do not have time to think to close your eyes. Rather, once your eyes are closed, you realize the reason for sudden closure of your eyes. It is really surprising that how quickly your eyes respond to the light. In bright light, radial muscles relax and circular muscles of the iris contract. It helps you to protect your eyes as less light enters the eye through the contracted pupil. In dim light, radial muscles contract and circular muscles of the iris relax. The aperture widens and more light enters the eye through the dilated pupil. So, in all these examples of reflex actions, the purpose was to prevent you from any injury which could happen due to sudden change in the environment. Reflexes occur without our thinking. Brain is not involved in the execution of these reflexes. When a receptor present in the sense organs gets stimulated, it sends a signal to the central nervous system, where usually the brain coordinates and the response comes in the form of action. But sometimes a very quick response is needed to protect you. In this case, the brain is not involved to take action. This results in reflex action. If you are to think about the hot object first and then react to the heat sensation, it would take a long time, resulting in the damage to the hand. A reflex action is a rapid automatic response to a stimulus. Thinking to react to that stimulus by involving brain may take longer to perform that action. This is because thinking is a complex activity and involves complicated interactions of many nerve impulses from many neurons concentrated in brain. But there is no damage, as withdrawal of the hand is immediately done without the involvement of thinking process. Reflex action. Let us take an example to understand how reflex action takes place. When you happen to get close to a burning object, you will always pull your hand away from the object without thinking about it. To protect ourselves is inbuilt or innate behavior, and we all behave in the same way. Pain is the most obvious stimulus that sets the whole reflex into action. See how it all happened. Actually, when you feel the burning sensation, a sensory receptor in the skin generates nerve impulse, which moves along the axon of a sensory neuron towards the central nervous system. When it reaches the spinal cord, the impulse passes to the interneuron lying within the spinal cord. This interneuron connects with a motor neuron. The dendrites of the motor neuron carry the impulse. The nerve impulse travels along the axon of motor neuron to the effector, which is usually a group of cells present in muscle fibers. The muscle fibers sense the impulse brought through the motor neuron and withdraw themselves to protect from burning. Did you notice one thing? That the action to protect your hand has been taken care within the spinal cord. The impulse generated by the receptor did not reach brain, rather took command from the spinal cord in the form of motor reflex and saved you from burning. The route followed by nerve impulse to produce this reflex act is known as reflex arc. A reflex arc is nerve pathway followed by the impulse that causes a reflex action. The reflex arc is made up of 5 basic elements. These include the receptor, the sensory neuron, interneuron, the motor neuron, and the effector. Receptor. A receptor is a group of specialized cells that receives the stimulus from the surrounding. Sensory neuron or efferent neuron. a neuron which conducts impulses representing information from the stimulus. Control center. Those cells on the central nervous system which receive sensory information from the environment, process that information, and if appropriate, generate motor commands to effectors' organs in response to the stimulus from the environment. Interneuron. A nerve cell found entirely within the central nervous system that acts as a link between sensory neurons and motor neurons. The information about a stimulus is analyzed by interneuron of spinal cord. Motor neuron. A neuron that conveys impulses outward from the interneuron present in the spinal cord to the cells present in the effector. Effector. A group of cells which receives impulse through motor neuron and can respond to the impulse. The response initiated by the effector organ is known as a reflex action. The receptor responds and sends the information via sensory neuron. It reaches the spinal cord and here the interneurons take over the situation. Motor neuron receives the information and immediately the muscles involved contract to produce a withdrawing snap action. Reflex actions are automatic or involuntary movement of living organisms. They are of two types: unconditioned reflexes and conditioned reflexes. The unconditioned reflexes are the reflexes that are not dependent on individuals' past experiences with a particular type of stimulus. All these reflexes which we learnt by now are of this type only. During these reactions, body reacted whether there was any past experience or not of that stimulus. Conditioned reflexes are the reflexes which any living organism learns from previous experiences with similar stimulus. These reflexes work by learning to associate one stimulus with something else. For example, a dog may begin to salivate with the ringing of bell, which was used in past to invite the dog for the food. Conditioned reflex. It is a reflex that does not exist in the natural behavior of the organism, but can be programmed in the organism in due course of time. This Russian scientist called Ivan Pavlov carried out some experiments where he used trained dogs to expect food whenever he rang a bell. You all know the dog salivates naturally when given food. Pavlov rang a bell every time he wanted to give food to the dog. After much repetition, the dog salivates when the bell rings, even when there is no food. This is an example of conditioned reflex. The dog was conditioned to salivate when the bell rang. The food is called primary stimulus. The ringing bell is called a secondary stimulus. A ringing bell does not normally cause salivation in dogs. However, when the ringing bell becomes a secondary stimulus, it started causing salivation even when there was no food to eat. So the dog had learned an association between the bell and the food, and a new behavior had been learned. Because this response was learned or conditioned, it was called a conditioned response or conditioned reflex.